Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading, Falling Again by Libby K, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1. Come on, kiddo. You don't want to do this. Yes, I do, a shrill voice replied. Natalie Snyder was used to getting her way. She commanded a room as soon as she walked in. She could negotiate and play politics better than anyone in Buckeye Falls and most of Ohio, and she certainly did not negotiate with terrorists. But at the moment, she was involved in the stare down of the century with a 5-year-old. Give me the bottle, Maddie, Natalie urged, her hand outstretched toward her daughter. No, shouted the little girl, her blonde curls shaking in protest. Mine. The last word came out as a whine, and Natalie fought an eye roll. Whining was the first step in a 5-alarm meltdown. Maddie, Natalie said, her voice light but firm. Let mommy have it. Madeline looked at her mother, her small head tilted slightly in concentration. She looked just like that scrawny dinosaur in Jurassic Park just before it spewed venom. Mine, she repeated, her arms raising the chocolate sauce higher. Never in her 5 years had she shown such a desire for chocolate milk. Natalie saw the sauce oozing from the nozzle, and she held her breath. Please, sweetie, I'll make your milk if I can have the bottle. Madeline's expression shifted from determined to woeful, but her fingers still clenched the bottles. I want to do it, she cried, tears pooling in her big blue eyes. Breaking eye contact for a second, Natalie looked for reinforcements. Anthony was upstairs getting ready for work, and Otis was nowhere to be seen. Usually their toddler liked to join in the chaos, not avoid it. His silence made Natalie nervous. A silent toddler was never a good thing, but she didn't have time for that now. As if taking her mother's broken eye contact as a sign of victory, Madeline raised the bottle of chocolate syrup and squeezed with all of her might, her chubby hands shaking from the force. A fountain of chocolate sprayed into the air, covering Madeline, the kitchen, and Natalie in chocolate ribbons. Natalie tried to hold back the profanity that escaped her lips, but it was no use. The words left her mouth with the same force as the sticky syrup. That's what I get for designing a white kitchen, she groaned as she stumped forward and snatched the now empty bottle from her daughter's hands. Madeline cried immediately, waving her arms and spreading the chocolate in a 3-foot span around her. My bottle, it's mine, she wailed. You are in deep trouble, young lady, Natalie said as she scooped up her daughter. With her free hand, she tossed the offending bottle into the sink and marched upstairs. Each step toward the bathroom brought a fresh kick from Madeline, but she ignored the pain. She was a mother on a mission. Anthony appeared at the top of the stairs, looking handsome in his gray tailored suit. He was better prepared for the day on Capitol Hill than a food fight with a kindergartner. The charcoal of the fabric brought out the flint in his eyes, but Natalie didn't have time to enjoy the view. What the hell happened? Anthony asked, sidestepping the duo and raising his hands like they were about to rob him. Natalie plopped Madeline on the edge of the bathtub and pointed, Don't move a muscle. Madeline looked back and forth between her parents and said, Mommy and Daddy both said bad words. You need to put a quarter in the swear jar each, she demanded from her perch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. The girl started counting while Natalie peeled off her ruined blouse and tossed it into the laundry basket. It landed with a sad, soggy thud. Anthony stood still, taking in the sight of his wife and her bra, but he didn't offer to help. Natalie looked down at herself, back at Anthony, and frowned. It was the first time she'd been shirtless in front of him in longer than she cared to admit. She caught her reflection in the mirror and hurriedly wrapped a towel around her torso. Was it still considered baby weight if their baby was nearly 2 years old? But Natalie didn't have time to dwell on that. Can you please go find Otis? I haven't heard from him in 5 minutes, which can only mean something bad is happening. Staring at her for a moment, Anthony finally nodded and headed for the stairs. Over his shoulder, he said, I can have my mom come over if you need to go out for a meeting or anything. I can't be late for town council. Natalie looked at her watch and groaned. That'd be nice. I need to get cleaned up before I meet Jenny. Thanks. Turning back to her daughter, she took off her dirty dress and added it to the chocolate-stained heap in the laundry basket. Now, Maddie, you need to be a good girl today, okay? No more messes, and you need to listen to Mommy, Daddy, and Grammy. Madeline smeared the chocolate syrup from her hands all over her cheeks and giggled. Look, I'm a mud monster. She raised her hands and growled. If Natalie wasn't already late to work and covered in sugar, she would have laughed. Now all she could muster was a smirk before turning on the faucet and plopping her mud monster into the warm water. Reaching out, Madeline asked, "Can I have some toys, please?" Natalie squirted some shower gel into the water and shook her head. "No, Maddie, this isn't playtime. You need to get ready for school. Don't you want to see your friends today?" In response, the little girl stuck her foot under the faucet, causing the water to spray all over Natalie's face. Great, now she'd have to reapply her makeup. "Maddie, stop." Natalie hated shouting at her kids, but now wasn't the time for games or impromptu facials. "You need to sit still and wash off that chocolate. Do you understand?" "Hold that tub," Anthony said from the door. He held out in front of her husband was Otis, caked in mud and looking like something found under a doormat. Dirt was smeared all over his chubby cheeks, and he was laughing like he heard the funniest joke in the world. Unlike Natalie, Anthony had managed to hold their son at arm's length, his tailored suit safe from kicking feet. Even his wingtips were clean, not a speck of dust to be seen. If he wasn't battling a toddler, he could have been on the pages of a glossy fashion magazine. Natalie frowned. "Do I even want to know?" Anthony grimaced and dunked his son into the tub. "Probably not. Turns out our little explorer can fit through the doggy door in the garage. I found him knee-deep in the mulch bag." Otis laughed as he splashed his sister, causing Madeline to join in the water fight. Before Natalie could blink, half her bathroom was a war zone. "Come on, guys, no playing right now. We're all late." Natalie turned to find Anthony scrolling through his phone, his brow knitted in concentration. "Mom's running behind," he said. "There was a fender bender off Main Street, and she stopped to help." Donna Snyder was a retired nurse who never hesitated to help a neighbor. The update wasn't surprising, but it was certainly inconvenient. Natalie looked at her watch again and didn't muffle her next swear word. "I'm so late. What time is your meeting?" "In 10 minutes. I really gotta go." Anthony looked helplessly at the mess in front of him, but he took a step back. "Sorry, Nat." Waving to the kids, Anthony ordered, "You both do exactly as Mommy says, okay?" "Mommy owes another quarter to the swear jar," Madeline stated, clearly proud of herself. "That jar is going to be their college funds if this continues," Natalie muttered, carefully pulling Otis out of the tub and covering him in a towel. Despite his time in the mulch, he still had a hint of baby smell left on his skin. Natalie hugged him and kissed his cheek. She didn't like how big her baby was getting. Listening to the sound of Anthony's feet fading down the stairs, Natalie pulled a pink towel down for Madeline. "All right, young lady, you're next." Carefully stepping out of the tub, Madeline fell into the towel and her mother's embrace. "What's for breakfast?" she asked, and Natalie heard her tummy rumble. Of course, breakfast, the meal she was trying to put together before they had their battle over the chocolate syrup. Would this morning never end? Otis jumped for joy beside them, his hands flapping in the air. "Pancafes," he said. Her son was still learning to talk, and words never came out quite right. Right now, he sounded like he had a mouthful of marbles. Given their current situation, she wouldn't have been surprised. "No pancakes today, Otis. We'll probably have a shake." "Boo," Madeline said, fighting her mother as she tried to dry her off. Otis, never one to miss a chance to scream, joined in. "Boo," he wailed, stomping his tiny feet. Natalie lifted her fingers to her lips and whistled a piercing sound that silenced her children. "Listen up," she barked. "You each have 1 minute to get dressed, okay? First one downstairs in all their clothes and shoes gets a piece of candy and their lunch." The two children raced off toward rooms, and Natalie fell back on her heels and sighed. She knew they'd both be downstairs in record time, as sugar was always a motivator. Pulling herself to standing, Natalie went downstairs to see Anthony hadn't cleaned up the kitchen before he left. Thankfully, it wasn't the strawberry syrup, otherwise it would have looked like a crime scene. With a sigh, Natalie pulled out her phone to call her business partner and friend. "Jenny, I'm going to be late this morning," she said into her phone. It was turning out to be a hectic Monday, and she was hoping she could count on her business partner. Her life partner had been letting her down recently. Anthony ran into the town council meeting, his shoes slipping on the polished floors of the town hall. He hadn't been late yet this quarter, and he wasn't starting now. No matter how early he set his alarm, his mornings never seemed long enough. Images of the chaos he had just escaped circled in his brain, but Anthony shook his head. He needed to get into mayor mode, or this meeting would be an equal disaster, although hopefully with less dirt and chocolate. Morning, Mayor Snyder, Jillian Oscar said from her spot at the other head of the conference table. Jillian had been on the council since Anthony was in diapers and his own father was mayor. While very dedicated to Buckeye Falls, Jillian never missed an opportunity to knock Anthony down a peg when he showed any weakness. Showing up 1 minute late to the meeting was definitely a weakness. Good morning, Jillian. Anthony plopped down on his chair and opened his messenger bag. A small pile of mulch fell out of the side pocket, a gift from his son. Dusting the dirt onto the floor, Anthony turned to greet the other council members. Morning, everyone. Let's get to business, shall we? Jillian leaned over her agenda and clicked her pen. I think we should start with the vacancy on the council. It's been a few weeks since Gerald retired, and we need to fill his spot. Reaching into her purse, she retrieved a piece of paper and shook it open. Violet Hemsworth and Agnes Sanders both showed interest in joining. Anthony had to bite the inside of his cheek to stop himself from speaking up. Violet and Agnes were nice people, but they were also old enough to remember the Hindenburg disaster and didn't want to see any changes in Buckeye Falls. Anthony was desperate to find someone who was in the middle, willing to listen to both his ideas and the long-term council members. James Gibson cleared his throat from across the table. A man in his late 30s, he'd lived in Buckeye Falls for almost a year and had brought in a balance of local and outside perspective. James was an artist who moved to the small Ohio town in search of peace and concentration for his art. Anthony had liked him immediately, as he was no nonsense in these meetings. Both women would bring a lot to the council, James offered. I agree, Jillian interrupted. I think it's high time we got back to basic values in this town. Now Anthony really needed to hold his tongue. There were values, then there were Jillian's values. Anthony didn't have the time or energy to hop onto her soapbox now. Why don't we let James continue, he asked, striving for a diplomatic tone. Thanks, Anthony, James said. I was thinking we should get one of the small business owners from Main Street involved with the council, one of the boutique owners, or maybe Max Sanchez from the diner. Anthony perked up at the mention of Max. While their friendship wasn't entirely on solid ground, the two had gotten closer since their wives started the N&G planners together. That's a good idea. Someone like Max would bring a lot to the table. Why don't we reach out and see if he's interested? Jillian frowned and clicked her pen several times, cutting through the silence. I think everyone should present their ideas for the council. Then we'll all vote. Anthony couldn't disagree. He knew if Max was interested, he'd win over the rest of the council members. Nodding, he made a note for the vote to take place at the next council meeting. After discussing other business, Anthony adjourned the meeting and packed up his things. Before he could get the last of his papers into his messenger bag, Jillian was at his side. Do you have a moment, Mayor? Of course he didn't, but Anthony knew he needed to play ball. Sure, Jillian, what can I do for you? During his father's time in the hot seat, he was famous for making time for every Buckeye Falls resident. Whether he had the time to give was another matter entirely. Jillian offered a bland smile and slid her gaze up and down Anthony's frame. He hadn't felt that scrutinized in ages, and he was grateful he'd chosen his favorite suit that morning. I know you have a lot going on right now with Natalie's new business and the children, but I'm concerned with your workload. Anthony should have seen this coming. His father had been very dedicated for over 2 decades, never missing an event in Buckeye Falls, nor any council meetings. What the residents and council members didn't realize was that his father missed a lot at home. While his father was cutting ribbons and touring the town, Anthony and his sister were playing football, dancing, going to debate competitions, and trying to impress their absentee dad. Jillian had always supported his father and wouldn't understand Anthony's attempts to balance work and home life. My workload is fine, Jillian. Thank you for your concern. Was there anything specific you wanted to discuss? I need to get to my next meeting. In truth, Anthony didn't have a meeting for another 30 minutes, but he wanted to find a moment to check in with Natalie. He hated leaving her stressed and alone this morning. The look of defeat on her face brought a dull ache to his chest that he couldn't shake. Hesitating for a moment, Jillian finally shook her head. No, that's all for now. Make sure you're not late next time. It was on the tip of his tongue to defend himself, to tell Jillian off. He had been 1 minute late, and none of the other council members seemed to notice, but he had enough political savvy, even on a Monday morning, to know when to stay silent. Now was certainly one of those times. Of course. Have a great week, Jillian. And with that, Anthony gathered the last of his things and paced down the hall to his office, a small trail of mulch left in his wake. Anthony was greeted by his assistant, Trudy Cook, a Buckeye Falls native who had worked for his father. Trudy was stubborn yet passionate, and Anthony adored her. You have a missed call from your dad, something about the lake house. You had a call from the sewage company and another one from the electric company, something about tax cuts. Reaching out with his free hand, Anthony took the stack of pink slips and went to his office. Trudy followed and handed him a mug of coffee and the local paper. Thanks, Trudy. You're a lifesaver. The older woman chuckled and pointed to the paper. The headline was about the summer camp for honor students at the high school, Shining Stars Academy. There was a kickoff event later that month, and he and Natalie were expected to attend. Anthony was happy these kids had a bright future, but they were eating up his schedule. Don't forget about the Shining Stars event. You need to RSVP and confirm your involvement by Friday. Do you think Natalie will be available? Before she started her business, Natalie had always been available for Anthony, even after having the kids. She'd somehow show up on his arm, dressed to the nines, with a smile on her face. She had taken the role of Buckeye Falls First Lady like a fish to water. But lately she seemed to be missing some of her Natalie spark. So was Anthony if he was being honest. Anthony's thoughts went back to the morning. Seeing Natalie standing in front of him in her lacy bra had brought his pulse up and nearly knocked him to the floor. They hadn't had much alone time recently, and Anthony hadn't realized how much he'd missed seeing his wife until she stood there half naked and covered in chocolate syrup. Did you hear me, Anthony? Trudy asked, snapping her fingers in front of his face. What? Oh, yeah, summer camp. He rubbed his eyes and reached out for the cup of piping hot coffee, wishing he could chug it. Caffeine and a sense of inadequacy were his favorite morning companions these days. Trudy offered a sad smile and reclined on the desk. Yes, the camp, but you also need to decide where we're starting the 4th of July parade this year. A few businesses have already called to stake their claim on the starting line. Can you email me a list? He asked, assuming it was already waiting in his inbox. Done and done. Deadline for that decision is Wednesday. Just let me know and I'll reach out to the shop owners. How would I ever run this town without you, Trudy? You wouldn't. She winked and closed the door, leaving Anthony to stew in his office. A mountain of paperwork and emails awaited him, but all Anthony could think about was Natalie. He missed his wife, truly and with all his heart. The trouble was, he didn't know how they could find their way back to how they were before. Much like the mounting piles of tasks in front of him, finding his way back to Natalie seemed nearly insurmountable.